Hi, I'm Rick Crow, and this is Short Track Stories.
All right, Garrett, thank you so much for joining us here on Short Track Stories. How you doing?
Doing great, man. Appreciate being on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for us to talk with you tonight and get to know just a different region of short track stories in the U.S. And first and foremost, like to always throw this out there with everybody, but where did racing originate with you?
For me, it started in 1977. It was called the Northwest Superstock Association, which we traveled around to, I think, 4 different states and in Canada. And I ran for Rookie of the Year that year and ended up getting Rookie of the Year my first year racing. One of the little story about back then is we raced up at Kamloops, British Columbia. It was a quarter-mile track. It was on the Indian reservation up in the mountains. And when we got there, we had to shovel off the buffalo poop to be able to race there.
No way.
It's something I've never experienced anywhere else before. But
that's awesome. What was that car, Garrett? What kind of car was that?
That was a 1971 Plymouth Roadrunner.
A Roadrunner. Big old boy. How is it when...
That was a Plymouth. Yeah.
We've heard of guys going to Canada. How was it getting like in and out of there with your? If you had a hauler and stuff.
Well, that one wasn't bad, but we used to race up on the island at Western Speedway and up at Victoria, and you had to ride a ferry over there. That was a little bit more difficult.
So you had to put your hauler on a ferry and all that and go over there, huh?
Yeah, that track is getting ready to close down. It's been open for like 60 years. There's a lot of history up there.
Is that a road race track or a oval?
It's a 3/8. It's like the size of, kind of like the size of Saugus.
Yeah, we've had a couple of guys that we've talked to that have raced up in Canada, up in that area. I think Insolo raced up there, and
he drove. I'm not sure if it was. They had the Trick Camaros up there. I don't know if it was Ronnie Esau or Enslow at the time. But Mark Reno was the crew chief at that time. Rod Beans owned the cars.
Yeah, I think it was that that white Trick car, I think, is what he raced up there, the wedge body car.
Yeah.
I also think I read someplace, Garrett, where did you race in Australia?
No, I never did.
No, somebody else was talking about that. So 1977. Basically, it's kind of a street stock, like what they would call today a street stock.
Well, that car I bought, it was in a barn over in Marysville, but it was a Winston West car, which is what they call the Canyon or ARCA cars now. It's actually the same thing as a Cup car, but it was a West Coast version.
Right.
That's what we ran around here. They called them late model sportsmen, and they had the Winston West series, and they were pretty close to the same rules.
Interesting. Did you ever jump in any of the West races when the West came up and ran through the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, I drove one in 1980 when David Pearson came up here. But I drove for the wholesale truck parts car out of Portland, Oregon. I drove for them in I think it was in 86. And we ran 500 lappers back then. They were actually televised on ABC Wide World of Sports. I ran one at Monroe, and I ran one at Calgary.
And where's Calgary at?
Calgary's in Alberta.
Yeah, it's in Alberta. They had Olympics up there one time. It's a beautiful city.
Oh, okay. So another one in Canada. So David Pearson came up. Is he the Silver Fox? Or
that's correct. Yeah, he came in. That was in 1980.
How did that race go? Did you show him some stuff?
No, I blew a hole in the side of my motor, and then I met my engine builder because it had a hole, and he came down and introduced himself and said that he could weld that thing back together and put it back together, which he ended up doing, and he kind of helped me get going in my racing career and was with me for like another 10 years there, and we did a lot of good things together. His name was Jim Sosi.
What was the first race you ever remember attending?
Well, it would be like 1970, and it was at the Wenatchee Valley Super Oval. And the guy lived across the street from my grandpa. He had a repair shop, and he was building the motors for this car that this guy was racing. It was like a 61 Impala. He took me up to the races, and they had like 55 and 56, 57 Chevys running around there with big old tires sticking out the side. I heard the noise and was hooked from that day forward.
That's awesome. Now, do you own that track now, Garrett?
Yes, I do. And then I have a couple people that are partners with me, Jeremy Andrews and Michelle Monroe.
But that's full circle right there, right?
I guess you could say that.
The fact that, you went there as a kid and now it's, you have some partnership in the track. And what, I also know that on your graduation from high school that you took a little trip with your pops back to Indianapolis or Indy, huh?
Yeah, we went to the Indianapolis 500. That's what I wanted to do for graduation present. And when I was back there, I went to a mile dirt track at the Indiana Fairgrounds on Friday night. We went to Indianapolis Raceway Park, which is a 5/8 paved track. And that on the Friday night, we went out to the mile dirt track out there at the fairgrounds. We went out there, and we were sitting a couple rows below Andy Granatelli and Mario Andretti, which Andy Granatelli is famous for the SDP turbine cars. And we got to watch A.J. Foyt, who I listened to over the years when I was growing up as a kid. We listened to all the Indy races on the radio before we even had TV. And I went down to get his autograph after the race was over with. But he had taken off. And Jan Opperman was there, and he ended up being second in the race. And so I got his autograph, and I was so amazed at what a job he'd done, because he had no practice and started at the back of the pack and passed everybody on the outside, never lifted. And so I ended up naming my son after him. But in '89, I was racing at Phoenix in the Copper Classic. And Ted Musgrave won. I got second. A.J. Foyt got third. Jerry Bowers, a good friend of mine that passed away, got fourth, and Kenny Schrader got fifth. And we were in the garage after the race was over with, where they're doing all the teching of the top 5 cars. And I told AJ if he would have stayed around, my son would have been named AJ instead of Jan Offerman.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you ever get his autograph?
I never got his autograph. I should have. He was one of the guys that I always looked up to. He drove all kinds of different kinds of race cars. Just from School of Hard Knocks,
I was at that race, Garrett, and I remember I went to all the Copper World Classics. They were great shows, and a lot of the tour races and the Silver Crown and all that. And it's interesting because I named my son because I was going to call him AJ. And we never ended up calling him AJ. We called him by his middle name, so I kind of blew that one. But so have you ever told Jan, your son, that his choice was Jan or AJ, huh?
Yeah, he knows that.
I guess that's pretty good. So speaking of the Copper World Classic, I think, didn't you have a race there where you and Trickle were door to door? Was that the Copper World Classic?
That would be the AC Delco 300 that was in the fall, and that was in '89.
The same year, yeah.
Yeah, and we had run at Rockford with that car, and we had built a new motor for Phoenix, but the motor didn't run for Maine, so we put the little short track motor back in it. But in 1981. I went back to Kalamazoo, Michigan to Randy Sweet's shop. It was in December. I remember it was like 10, 20 below zero. We had an old Ford Fairmont rear-wheel drive car running around out there in the snow, going through all those toll bridges they had out there, those toll places, getting to Michigan from Chicago. But I met Dick Trickle there. And everybody got home except for Dick Trickle, and him and Randy Sweet and this guy I went back there with were all sitting around having a beer, but they all went to bed. And I stayed up all night listening to Dick Trickle, some of his stories, and I learned more that one night than I ever did in my whole racing career. It was unbelievable what I learned from that guy, and I was able to race against him at Phoenix in the fall of '89, and man, we had a hell of a battle. It was me and him and Ron Hornaday, and that race was televised. And it was like the first time they had televised this for a short track guys, which was the Southwest Tour at the time. So we're all excited. And there was a tire war going on between Hoosier and Goodyear. And me and Hornaday were on Hoosiers and Dick Trickle was on Goodyears. But Dave Foods was crew chiefing for me back then. He was getting ready to move back east and start up his big cup team. And he had built my cars, and so we got a chance to one more last time to race together. And he kept saying he needed to touch it for TV time, and we did. We're leading the race, but the tire blew. And the old veteran Trickle, he ended up winning the race. He's smarter than the rest of us.
KG veteran, because even Hornaday was a little green at that point.
Yeah. But what I was so amazed about is after that race was over with, he came down and he was driving for the Stavola brothers back then because Mike Alexander got hurt down in Pensacola. And Dick Trickle stepped in and drove for him. But, Dick Trickle was a rookie, I think, that year, too, at the age of like somewhere around 47 or so. But he came over and got in our trailer after the race was over with and had a few beers with us, told stories, and here he was going to race a 500 after the next day, but everybody had gone home except for us and Dick Trickle that evening. We're the last ones to leave. I mean, he just was a hell of a people person, It took the time for us other little guys, I guess I would say.
That's a story often told about him was he was the last guy to leave the pits and talk to everybody.
I loved him. That was a great guy. I went back and raced at Slinger Speedway. I think it was somewhere around 2012. It was just before he had passed away, and he was there. And it was then he came in my trailer, and Howie Little, I think that's how you say his name. He was a really famous crew chief from back there. He ended up passing away from cancer, but he was in there too, and and he was crew chief in Ted Musgrave when I was there in '89 when Ted won that Carver Classic. But it was good to see those guys. Dick wasn't supposed to be drinking anymore or whatever, but he went down to this little pub that they hang out at Slinger, and I got to spend some time with him that night. And it was a good quality time, but then it wasn't long after that he passed away,
Yeah, that was unfortunate.
Yeah.
So back to Phoenix, you ran probably 4, 5, 6 times there before you got your first win at Phoenix.
We got second 4 times in the Copper World Classic. I ran my first race there. It was another guy's car in '86, and I may be wrong. It might have been somewhere. It might have been '88. It was before they had the first Cup race there, and there was a lot of Cup guys in that race. It was the Southwest Tour race, but I didn't win until like 1998. I won the AC Delta 300 in '88. I should have won it in or not 98. I should have won it in '99, but they black flagged me because I came in and changed the tire. But I changed the tire because it only had like 4 pounds in it. I went from the back to the front. By the time I got to the lead again, they black flagged me, and then I won it again in 2000.
So in '98, when you won it, Mears and Harvick were in that race.
Yeah, he was. I hadn't planned on running that race. I've been on the road for like 45 days, and we'd run the All-American 400 in Nashville. And we were heading home, and they used to have what they called like a racing magazine newspaper back then. And we started out at Twin Falls, Idaho, and run there. And then we went to Rockford, Illinois, and went from Rockford to Concord, North Carolina. And then we went to Nashville. And then we were heading home, but we read about this race at Phoenix and been on the road and forgot all about it and stuff, and been on the East Coast, and we decided we'd run there, but we didn't have a pit crew, so we went to the Walmart parking lot there in Phoenix and worked on the car after running all these races and patched the body back together and did all the maintenance. And we just got through running a 400 lapper. And a friend of mine was spotted for Ricky Craven, who was running the truck series at the time. And so we used his pit crew, and we ended up winning the race.
That's a great story.
We would go from first back to somewhere in the high 20s, back to first, back to the high 20s. And I never took on left side tires in that race. It was 188 laps. They call it 300 because of the kilometers. But they asked me after the race was over with, when I was down doing the press conference thing, why didn't you stop for tires? And I told them that the pit crew wasn't very good. And if they weren't, I changed the tires, and they were supposed to help us at Las Vegas when we ran there later on, about 3 weeks later, but they decided they weren't going to help me. But the tires were so hard, we didn't need their help. We just needed their help for doing the fuel. But I learned kind of keep my mouth shut about some of that stuff afterwards, and maybe appreciate their help, no matter how it turned out, you know.
Yeah, that's a hard lesson to learn, and it's kind of a common theme with some of the guys like True Cheek and Insolo and stuff. So you're saying you were coming home from Nashville, and then you read in a paper there was a race at Phoenix, and so you guys decided to stop?
Yeah, that's we were going through Texas, and I remember and going through what was it, New Mexico or someplace like that, because I remember a sign about Unser Boulevard or something, and we just ended up, you know, and we ended up going to Phoenix, you know.
Oh, man.
I had no idea. But one of the problems with our pit stops is that we had wide five, and the truck series, they run the 5-on-5 wheels, and they were used to that, not the wide five, so that made it harder, you know.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, we had wide fives on our super lates at that time too. And
So what, Garrett? What's the farthest east that you went to race?
I've been all over the East Coast. I've raced at Oxford, Maine a couple times. I've been from Oxford, Maine, all the way down to Daytona Beach to run at New Smyrna or Volusia County, you know, everywhere in between.
Is there what state? Or I guess this is a better question. What states have you not raced in?
There's probably some of them in the middle, like Nebraska and those kind of things. But I raced just about every paved track there ever was on the West Coast. I raced at 80% of them on the East Coast, you know.
That's wild. How did you go across the country like that?
Well, I started out, a friend of mine got me a ride at Concord Speedway when they used to have the Big Ten Series. So I got back to running just at Concord, which is in Charlotte. And that's a really fast high bank tri-oval. And then they started up in the mid-90s, late 90s, they started up the Hooters Super Late Model Series. And the guy that was the crew chief for the car at Concord ended up owning his own car, and they built it there at Butler built. They had a shop back there. We built those Daytona dash cars, and they built I think it was left-hander at the time, but they built it in that shop, and I raced that in some of the Hooters races. And then I took my own car back and run in the Midwest, and I think Artco they called it, and that was at Rockford. And then we kind of met some of those guys, and we run some races around there, like at Milwaukee and at Slayer. And I met Tom. Tom Mayberry had seen me at Saugus in 1980. In the Ray Wilkins Memorial Race. It was 84, 85.
Mm-hmm.
And he happened to be at that time, but he owns Oxford Speedway now, and he owns the Pass Series. He kind of got me to come back there. He came out and put some races on in the Northwest. I became good friends with him. I think I first raced at one of his races at North Wilkesboro. And then it might have been 2011, 12, somewhere around there. It was the first time that they had kind of got that track open again. It was under the lights that night, but they had a tornado that came through there, and they had to shut the track down and run the race the next day.
Jeez.
Then, so Wilkesboro was open. Did you say that was like 2011, Garrett?
Yeah, somewhere around there, 2000. I think that's about that year was 2011, 12, somewhere around there.
And then it closed again.
Yeah, I did.
And so are you going back? I'm going back next week.
No, I'm not going back now. I wish I was. That was really a fun experience to go there. It was a cool place.
Yeah, I've never been there. I'm going to go see Hornaday next week, and it's part of the racetrack revival. Then they're going to tear the pavement out and make it dirt.
Well, I'm hearing talk now. They're trying to talk them into keeping that pavement there and just put the dirt on top of it. Everybody's saying they want to race on that old asphalt. They don't want them to put the asphalt in.
Right. And you've been up to Maine. That's Oxford, right?
Yeah.
How did you pick those races?
Oxford is very well known. There was a guy from our area named Chuck Bound.
Yes.
He drove the same car that Jim Inslow. Jim Inslow drove it after he left the Winston West car. I think it's something drywall car. It was an orange and white 01 car.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of remember reading Stock Car magazine. This is back in the 70s and stuff, and I remember him winning the Oxford 250, and he was from the Northwest, so that kind of sparked my interest when I first started hearing about it. But that place has got a ton of history, and all the guys from the Southeast Bush cars used to come up and run there back in the 70s, and then the change evolved into late model cars.
So that was probably a good trek there, huh?
That track is a 3/8, but it's almost a circle, and you never get wide open. You never get off the gas. You just constantly throttle control from like an eighth of throttle, quarter throttle to like half throttle.
Kind of like Tucson, you think?
No, Tucson. You get the throttle down the straightaway. It's hard to explain. In parts of the track, you're banked the wrong way. Like out by the flag stand and going into turn one, your car is rolled over like it's going to tip over if you run out far enough. It's very, very unique. You got to run on your right rear all the time.
So, have you ever been like Mark Martin and just taken that spring out so you had enough cross to do it?
That's so funny to remember that. I used to race Dillon cars. I got some. Mark Martin came to Shasta Speedway when I raced there, and I think it was like 1984, 85, somewhere around there. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Did he have a wedge body car?
He drove a Dillon car, and Ray Dillon came out with him. There's a guy from Oregon that owned the car, and everybody had wedge body cars there. It was somewhat like that. Yeah, it was a wedge body car, but the car belonged to a guy in Oregon. It was like 120, 130 cars there, and Larry Deachens had the track record there. But Derek Cope broke the track record, and then in the Fuge House car, and then we went out and broke it, and then Mark Martin went out and broke it. But we felt that I didn't have a very big name at that time, but Mark Martin did. He was kind of making a comeback from running Winston Cup cars and then got back into late models. And we felt that the promoter made up the time because of who he was, and then he had a deal worked out when he brought a manager from back east where he wouldn't have to pay at least that was the story, he didn't have to pay the fast time money that was supposed to pay for the track record or whatever.
Oh, interesting. That happens at a lot of places, that kind of stuff.
And that's on YouTube. But it really took the wind out of my sails because that meant a lot to us that had happened, and we didn't get it,
Right.
But
yeah, it's always nice to break a record, right? To break a track record and qualify.
That night at the bar, he was down there, and we had run a qualifying race that night. I think I kind of roughed him up a little bit to get by him to prove to the point that we were faster than he was, and he was telling us he was going to do the favor again in the main event the next day.
I've never seen you rough anybody up all the times I've seen you race.
But he was a good guy, and obviously everybody knows what he did in his career.
Right. Was Cope the first guy from the Pacific Northwest to make it big, or was Bound, you think?
Chuck Bound was there's all kinds of different. There's a guy named Billy Foster out of Victoria, Canada, was like the first guy that made it in Indy cars, and once the company got killed at Riverside back in the 60s. It might have been early 70s. He was the first big name, really big name guy. A lot of guys did the IndyCar stuff, but in stock car racing, yeah, Chuck Brown was, as far as the era that I'm aware of, There's a guy that's in the Hall of Fame, the West Coast Hall of Fame, that's from the Pacific Northwest, but he lived in California quite a bit. His name is Rick Hendrick. I think that's how you say it. And he was a NASCAR sportsman champion back in I'm not sure, it was 59 or in the really early years,
Mm-hmm.
And then he really...
Speaking of the West Coast Hall of Fame, Garrett, Steve O'Donnell gave you enshrinement to the West Coast Hall of Fame just recently, and you went in with your buddy Herschel McGriff. Explain, how was that? What was the feeling with that?
Well, Herschel was supposed to be doing the speech, but I'm not sure what happened to him. There might have been a health issue or something was going on, but he wasn't able to make it. So I was really honored to have Steve do the talking. But Herschel's in there, and he's somebody that when I first started racing with, he was one of my heroes, and I got a autographed picture of him in my shock room. And he drove the Holy Express, which was just a huge thing back in the 70s. It was a beautiful little Chevrolet Nova, white one with the gold numbers on it. Of course, the Olympia beer colors, He won a lot of races. He was really a class guy. And then when Rick passed away, Rick Hendrick, and he was a PR guy at Tucson at the time, both me and Herschel were as pallbearers at the funeral down there at Tucson Speedway. So I got to spend some time with Herschel then. It was a happy and a moment that I got to be put in the West Coast deal because Rick was in there as well as Herschel,
Yeah, all your buddies.
All the guys that I looked up to coming up through the ranks,
It took him a long time to get Herschel in, way longer than it should have.
Yeah, he's a class act and a huge benefit to what he did for racing in the Northwest as well as all over,
Agreed. And so we didn't, we were pretty much born and raised Santa Clarita Saugus guys, Brandon and I, and I'd come up to Monroe if the tour was racing or whatever, and so we didn't really know very much about the Pacific Northwest. But since we started doing this podcast, I've probably got 25 private messages to ask you to come on the show. So you have I would compare you right now to Dick Trickle, because Trickle raced everywhere also. He was all over the place.
Being that you're a Saugus Speedway guy, I wouldn't mind throwing a little shout out to some of the people that helped me when I went to that Ray Wilkins race.
Yes.
And we were fortunate to make it in the A feature because I had an A, B, and C and D main that night. A lot of good guys were in the B main. But we're getting down to about 10, 12 laps to go, and we were running second. Ronnie Esau was running first. And I don't know the guy's name, but I think his name is Chuck Pettit or something like that, and I might not be saying it right. But he had worked his way into third, and Dave was telling me to be careful because when he gets up here, he's going to start trying to knock you out of the way. But he told me not to do that to Esau because he said we should race Esau the way we would want to be raced, and Dave and Ron were really good friends. But I got pretty car award that night, which is not an award you want at Saugus Speedway. But right where the sweeper comes out by the flag stand, there's a little area right there.
Yeah.
I got into Ron Issa coming off turn 4, got him kind of crossed up, but I didn't want to pass him that way. And I let him gather back up. But at the time I was gathering back up, the guy that was in third hit me, and I got into that little opening there, hit it head on, and the whole back of the car went up and shoved the motor back into where the dash was and all that stuff. And we went to Roman Kalzinski. I don't know if you remember that name.
Yes.
We went to his body shop and straightened out the frame. And then we went to Jackson Race Cars. I don't know if you remember those guys.
I drove a Jackson super late.
Do you remember the Parrot he used to have there in the shop? Or maybe that might have been before your time, but he had a Parrot back then. We put all the interior sheet metal back in it and the body back together, and we went up to Shasta Speedway, but because of the hit we were leading the race in Shasta, but the motor seized up the main bearing because of the hit on the wall. But the guys in Saugus really went out of their way to help us when we were down there, so we get running again. I'll never forget that.
Isn't was that car an orange car?
No, that was all blue.
The one that put you in the pit exit right there. Was it orange?
I don't remember nothing about the car, the color, or anything. I just remember my Dave Foods was spotting for me. He was just telling me that the guy had, been aggressive coming up, which that's the way it was in Saugus anyway. But he had to run.
Oh yeah,
it was hard to put past there. But
could have been Chuck Pittenger.
Yeah, that's the name right there.
Yeah, Chuck Pittenger, the orange 50 car.
Yeah. But I had been to Bakersfield before when that guy from Stock Car Products put on that last race there. All the cars there were beautiful. I remember Steve Starr and all these guys, Jim Thurkettle, just beautiful race cars. Looked like show cars. But I got to Saugus and I knew something was up because nobody there had painted their frames. They were all different looking, had better front bumpers on them.
Yeah, they had nobody powder coated their front clips at Saugus because you were going to be changing it. And
Rod Means had asked Jimmy Henslow to help me. He gave me a lot of pointers about that place.
And Saugus ran big old Camaro bumpers, and depends on if they were in their wedge cars or not.
Yeah, the wedge cars, but they had these things that come up through your nose by where the calorie was there. When it went straight up to keep it from going underneath the back of them.
Yeah, like a vertical, like a cop push bar.
In fact, I don't know if you remember the name Randy Becker.
Yes.
A good friend of mine. Me and him were racing at Carson City, Nevada, and he was leading. I was the second. I was kind of laying the bumper to him a little bit, but my bumper got caught underneath his bumper. We were hooked together for 2 or 3 laps there.
So, isn't your experience across the country racing that most times if you're from out of town on a short track that the out of town people will open their doors and help you out like they did at Saugus?
It was that way back in that era. The guys wanted to help you to get on the racetrack, and then they wanted to beat you on the racetrack, but they didn't want to beat you off the racetrack. I just called a bunch of good old boys back then, hard-working guys that loved what they were doing and liked to have a few beers afterwards, And we got all pissed off a little bit after the race was over because back then in those days it was pretty rough, But it's different now. Everything's like top secret. We've got all these young kids racing with the older guys working on the cars. It's just a whole different era. I'm glad I got to race when I did,
Yeah, I feel the same way. We had Sean Woodside on last week, and I grew up racing with Sean, and he was saying the same thing that you're saying. Is it's just a different environment, but you're still winning races today, and the chassis and the shock packages are totally different than they were back in those days.
Yeah, no comparison. The technology has changed, but you still get out there. You still got to drive them and stay out of all the wrecks and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah. A couple of kids that kind of make their way up there and over in the Meridian in Idaho that are pretty good shoes are like Zach Telford and Jeremy Doss.
Yeah, I raced against both of them. They're really good. And I like both of them. They're really nice people,
Yeah. So some of the tracks, what did you think about Casey, Kern County?
Oh, when I went there, the new track?
Yeah, the new track.
Oh, it's beautiful. We didn't run very good when we were there. That's the only thing I didn't like about it. But when I walked into that place, I was in disbelief of how cool it was, how fast it was.
Why is it that all the tracks down here are extinct, and that track, Kern County doesn't even have a weekly show? If that track was in Monroe or Yakima or anywhere, it'd be the crown jewel and have a weekly show, right?
Well, I'll tell you something about short track racing. The best short track racing is for a local show is on the quarter mile. when you're running little 4-cylinder cars or street stocks, whatever. You get on a big half mile and the cars get spread out. Like the local shows, sometimes they only have 12 cars in some of these different classes. You put them on a half mile because the half miles up here and the 5/8 mile, they have had a hard time having local shows on those big tracks. But the little quarter-mile tracks have always done really good.
I would agree with you 100%. I'm glad you say it because I always tell people there's no replacement for putting your lawn chair against the fence in the pits at Saugus.
Oh, I remember that. That was the coolest thing. I remember coming down there in turn one and see people sitting there. I remember walking over and watching the cars, a hot lap and stuff, and that was awesome. I'm still in disbelief how a track that was right there, not far out of Los Angeles with all that population, that track's still there today, I've been told.
Yes.
It closed down. There's no, every race I ever went there, the place was packed. There's no reason whatsoever they somehow couldn't have updated those grandstands or whatever excuse they had why they closed it down. And I raced at Orange Show in San Bernardino, and that's kind of downtown back in the day, and they let them race there, and they still race there every once in a while. There's no reason why Saugus shouldn't be open. It's just a tragedy that somehow that place closed.
Yeah, it was a sad day. And Orange Show still has a show. Did you ever race anywhere in San Diego, like Balboa Stadium or anything like that?
No. I always wanted to go to El Cajon, but I didn't make it down there. And it wasn't long after we were racing down there that I think it closed too.
We've heard stories kind of up, not in the Pacific Northwest, but kind of more in the SAC area. And we haven't been able to confirm it, of racing at a drive-in and having to be out of the drive-in before nighttime so they could show movies.
When I started racing, what year was that? It was Portland Speedway is the one you're talking about. They had a drive-in theater there.
In Portland, Oregon?
Yeah, a half-mile track. And that track closed down too, but it had been there like 60 years. That's where Herschel's from. But yeah, they had a drive-in theater there, and they also had we used to race. The first 5 times I went there, it got rained down, but they also had wrestling matches in there set up in the infield, in the middle of the track. So you had movie theaters going on and wrestling matches. But they finally got it when the tour started running, the Northwest Tour, to have races there on Friday night. And they put lights in. They never had lights there before. It was always on a Sunday.
That's awesome. And what about the track where I think True Cheek was telling us up there somewhere there was a track that was in a blueberry field or by a blueberry field?
Oh, that's Portland Speedway. When you went in turns 1 and 2, it was a wall. But when you went off turns 3 and 4 at Portland, you went into these blueberries or huckleberries, whatever they were. And the cars would get lost. You couldn't even see them because they were back in the bushes. They figure out a way to get a hook on them and pull them out of there, but they come out with all this berry juice all over them.
What other tracks like that? I mean, the Pacific Northwest seems like it's kind of held on to their tracks pretty good, although is it Yakima that's still there but not racing? Or
no, they tore it up this year. We've lost at least a half a dozen tracks right here in the Northwest. Spanaway isn't open anymore. Port Angeles isn't open anymore. Of course, Portland Speedway, Spokane Raceway Park sitting there, but they're not using it anymore. The Tri-Cities closed down, but after 16 years of being closed, it got reopened, which was pretty cool. And then there's a bunch of tracks in Canada that closed down. Langley Speedway and the one in Vernon closed down, and the one in that was a beautiful track they had up there in Calgary. They closed down.
Why do you feel that is? I mean, I feel like when it comes to racing and the history of racing in America, like you can't tell that story without the great West Coast racers and the West Coast scene. But now, why do you feel like it is all across, the West and really across the country that these historic tracks are all closing?
Well, it comes down to where they financially can make it or not. It's a tough business. I know by owning a racetrack, and I thought I knew everything there was to know. We're going to tackle the world, but that wasn't the case. It's just tough to make a living. You take a business and have it only open, 20 times a year or 10 times a year, or whatever it would be. It's just tough to do it. You have all the expenses and a lot of money tied up building these tracks and maintaining them, and it's tough.
Go ahead.
That's interesting because, I think until you just said that, I had never thought about that before. I mean, Saugus had a really strong swap meet right there that paid the bills. But when your track is down, it's not season, you're still paying the bills for that track. And that's interesting. That's a good point.
You got all your bills for the whole year, and you got to amortize it out over 10 weekends, and then out of those 10 weekends, you might have, a rain out, or like an area, forest fires, so they got so much smoke, or, there's all kinds of reasons.
If you had to name, like, your top 3 tracks that are no longer in operation that you wish you could race right now, what would those 3 tracks be?
My number one would be Concord Speedway. That was the baddest racetrack I've ever raced at in my life. A lot of history there. That was a cool place. Henry Furr built that place. The old Interstate Fairgrounds, which would be our Saugus Speedway in the Northwest, which is where I started at. It's right next to the baseball field. It was a little 3/8 flat, identical to Saugus. That was a cool place. It had a lot of electricity in there. Because it was downtown Spokane, the place would be packed. And they built we had 3 racetracks within 12, 15 miles of each other. We had the quarter mile at the state line, and we had the new half mile up by the airport. But the people didn't want to travel the 10 or 12 miles out of town. They wanted to go right downtown. It was packed every time we raced there,
For the younger generation, how could you describe, or how could you articulate what it was like racing, in that heyday, where, like you said, you can go these little small town tracks or downtown tracks, and you can feel that electricity. How can you explain that to somebody?
You can't, because it's not the same. The places were packed. People related to stock car racing because every little place you went to, like in our area, which we have a lot of farmland, but every little service station, every farmhouse had a race car sitting out front. Everybody had race cars back then, but for me, when I was in high school in the 70s, our car was our whole life, and dads and the kids could work on them because they were easier to work on. And they had all these little speed shops where you could go buy parts and bolt them on your car, and you had stickers you could get at the speed shop and put on your windows, and you could cruise the avenue or go to the drive-in theater, and everybody had their hot rod cars. And there's a lot of pride in having your car. And then the people, they had a love affair for the automobile, and that kind of tied into what was going at the racetrack or going to their drag strip or oval track. There's a lot of pride in the automobile back then, and there was no cell phones, no stuff that they do there's no computers back then. It was a different era. It'll never be like that ever again.
Can you describe what the feeling was, or what the feeling is when you get behind a car? Like when you get behind a car right now and race at your age, is it the same feeling that you had when you were first starting out?
I'm gonna say I had my adrenaline when I was younger was going 24/7. Didn't matter what day it was. I was jacked up to get an opportunity to get in that race car. I still love the sound of them. I'm like a little kid. I'll be out in the parking lot going to a sprint car race or stock car race and hear the cars going around. I still have that rush to get in there. I want to see them. I'm a fan as well as a driver. But as I get older, I know that I don't know when the next time I'm going to be able to get in this race car again. And I really still appreciate that I can still do this at my age. I love it. Very lucky I've been able to do it for such a long time.
That's awesome.
And then when I am in the car, I seem like I have a lot more things to worry about than when I was younger, and I get a chance to get my mind off all the stress and everything with business and everything. And when you're in a race car, you forget about everything. You get to be a race car driver, you know.
Love it. That's
It's actually quiet in a race car, right? People don't understand that.
I would agree, you know.
You know, your mind is quiet. So Garrett, how many wins do you have today? 400.
Somewhere around there. Garrett Cressy, after he gave Mark Martin that fast time award, when he came back up to announce the Shasta Speedway, he upped how many wins I had by quite a bit to make up for that. So I contribute Garrett Cressy for doing that, but it's somewhere around 400 wins.
400 wins, over $1 million earned.
and over $10 million spent.
Yeah, I was going to say, how much of the $1 million you won was actually your money you put up for the purse anyway, right?
Yeah. I've been real fortunate to have a lot of good help over the years and been able to do it, you know.
So I had some people tell me some questions to ask you. Did you have an 18-wheeler at one point as a hauler?
Yeah, we bought it. We had a couple of them. We had one that we got from Bill Elliott that was there was no trailer, it was just a big truck. It was a fellow line. And that was really cool, but it only hauled one car. And then we got another one that when Bill Elliott was a driver for Junior Johnson. And back when it was between him and Alan Kowicki for the championship at Atlanta, Georgia. It was an old Kentucky truck, but it was, I guess we somehow ended up getting two of them that Bill Elliott had been part of, and then Junior Johnson on the last one there.
So the blue 18-wheeler that you had, the truck and trailer, was an old Bill Elliott one, huh?
It was actually Bill Elliott was driving for, but that trailer belonged to Junior Johnson. That's where that came from. Oh. The guy that invented the Hans device, he owned it at the time we got it. He was racing some kind of a road racing stuff, but he had bought it from Junior Johnson. When I was back at North Wilkesboro, I shared that with Junior Johnson, that I had a trailer because he was there. I was kind of their grand marshal or whatever.
Did you do much road course racing, Garrett?
I went to a road race school at Sears Point and down in the Phoenix area at Bondurant. And the first cup race that I tried to make was at Sears Point, which I wouldn't really recommend that. But so that's why I started the motor blew up in practice, and we bought another one. I didn't make the race. And then we had some Northwest Tour races at Portland Speedway on the road course. And we all got our butts kicked by all the California guys the first time they came up. And then we built cars for them and got to race a couple more years there. And then they did away with it, you know.
The California guys beat you because they had the Riverside experience?
Well, I think they were racing at Willow Springs at the time, man. Mm-hmm. And I might have been Sears Point, but I know they had spent quite a bit of time at Willow Springs, I think. But those guys were fly good. They knew what they were doing, and all the corners were to the right, most of them at Portland, where our cars were all built to turn to the left, and we had little small brakes on them, and they understood all that stuff. We didn't, you know. But it didn't take very long for us to figure it out. You know.
Who were the big guns that came up there and took your money?
Craig Rodman, I remember, was one of them.
Yeah.
And Jim Engelbright was another one. And then they had, let's call it gunslinger type guys, the guys that road raced all the time that came up and did it. I don't remember who those guys were because I'm not familiar with them too much, but I know there was 4 or 5 guys. That's all they did, road race, and they came up to it.
Did Engelbright at least give you some jelly bellies, or did he just take your money and go home?
No, he was good. I liked him.
Yeah, he was good on the road course.
Yeah, he was good everywhere back in his day when he was his heyday, you know.
The tour, did the Northwest Tour, did that come along as part of, to combat the Southwest Tour, and why did you guys run any combined points races?
I'll tell you about that. The Northwest Tour was the first touring division in the United States for NASCAR at that level. and they sent Brian France out here to kind of get this thing going. And they put a guy named Chuck Romeo was the head of a competition and the rules and all that stuff. And Dennis Huth, they had him here. He had run Portland Speedway at the time. So the PR guy,
Owen Kearns.
Owen Kearns, they had him up here. And this is before he had social media, had all newspaper stuff. So they started the Northwest Tour, and we raced everywhere. We raced Victoria, Calgary, Anderson, California, Carson City, Nevada. We went to every track in the Northwest. We even raced like on Saturday nights at Yakima Speedway and Sundays at Portland. And we raced at Anderson, California on a Saturday night, and we ran at Coos Bay on a Sunday. I mean, we did a lot of racing. And they went in and showcased the NASCAR name at all these short tracks and tried to get those tracks to become NASCAR weekly racing divisions. And also was a chance for Brian France to get out and kind of prove himself, in my mind, someplace out of the limelight, so Casey stubbed his toe. But they had a lot of people with a real good support cast around him. And our last race of the season was at Carson City, Nevada. And Big Bill France and his wife, Betty France, came out for the banquet. I remember that. That was a really cool thing for us guys at that time, you know. And then and they got on board with all the intensity sponsor, and it was really a good deal. But also at that same time, ASA had Rex Robbins and Rusty Walsh had come out to Spokane the year before, and they started ASA out here. And the ASA was really strong in the Northeast, in the Midwest. And I think NASCAR didn't want ASA to kind of take over the short track because they went head-to-head with a schedule and kind of run. And they also put the kibosh somehow with Skoll was sponsoring ASA because they were involved with the Busch cars. And there was some stuff going on there to kind of get rid of ASA and NASCAR, get a stronghold back with all these short tracks across the country. So they started the Northwest Tour, and then the very next year, all those guys, except for Brian France, went back down and started the Southwest Tour. And then they bought out All Pro from Bob Harmon and got it going there, and then they went up into the Midwest and bought out John McLaren in that Arco series. So they had the whole United States at that time.
I think that was the Southwest Tour. I think their first year was 85, 86 or something like that.
86, because we had the Northwest Tour in 85, and then they started up the Southwest Tour in 86, because that's the year that Ronnie Saw won the championship.
Rest in peace, Ronnie. He was a good racer. So the Crown Jewels, you've been to all of them, right?
Yeah. I think so.
Chili Willy, Snowball Derby, Apple Cup, Copper Classic, Montana 200.
And even the World Crown 300 in Jefferson, Georgia.
The Mark Galloway 150, I saw that you ran a different colored, you ran a black car with green lettering. That's not really what you normally are known for.
Well, the one I just won this summer was all blue. But the car you're thinking of was at Montana. That was the Montana 200. And where I came up with those colors is Rich Bickle drove for Terminal Trucking. And the most powerful short track team was in the late 80s. Started with Dave Mader and running for Terminal Trucking. And then Rich Bickle come down there, and Bobby Gill drove for him, Freddie Query drove for him. They were all jet black with that fluorescent green numbers on them. And that's just kind of a tribute, throwback to that car.
That was a good-looking car. You had another car, and I don't know what year it was. It looked like it was it could have been what we called a Shinova, like a Chevelle with a Nova, but it had an aero coupe with some louvers on the back windows.
That was a Plymouth Volare.
Plymouth Volare. Where did you race that? What was the chassis under that? A Seneca?
No, that car was actually a Petty car, and that was Don Dowdy had owned that car. He won like 7 championships with it, but he had made it a Plymouth Scamp, and I ran that car in '78, I got second in points in that car. But then Neil Newberry put a Plymouth Valari on it, and my last race in that car was at Monroe, and David Pearson came up for the Winston West race.
So that was a West car?
Yeah.
That was a good-looking car.
Out here, we could run NASCAR late model sportsmen, which are almost the same rules as Winston West. And when Winston West would come up here, they would all run together, you know.
They've not done a very good job with that division since then. I mean, it's all hacked up, and I remember we used to be able to get cars from back east, like what you're talking about, and go run them. But now they've made it almost impossible to run. The Winston West or the Arkham West series, when they come up to like Monroe and stuff, they don't even have a full field. I mean, you're talking about coming to Saugus, and there were D Maine, so that's got to be what, 120 cars at least.
Yeah. That last race they had there, all the races back in that era, like at Shasta Speedway, when we go there in the spring, there'd be close to 150 cars there, you know. But those days are unfortunately gone. But the best thing they could have done, in my opinion, and NASCAR decided they didn't want to do it. They wanted to get out of the short track deal, and they were building all these new super speedways or mile-and-a-half racetracks, and they thought that they could have these shows, a couple of days before the Cup cars come there, and have these, the East Coast and West Coast have these West cars, I would call them, the K&N cars. But your bread and butter is still your short tracks, and they've got away from the grassroots racer. If they would have kept the Northwest Tour and the Southwest Tour and just had 5 races up here a year and 5 races down there a year, make them all like 200 lappers with pit stops, like they did with that All-Pro Series that they had in the Southeast, they would have had a hell of a deal, because all those cars related to your local weekly racing series that they had back then. But they started thinking that we should be on, like at Las Vegas when we raced there in the mile-and-a-half. We had no business being there, but they started changing all the rules, the left side weight, the thickness of their frames, and they got away from what the local weekly guys had, which is what when we first started, and they had lots of cars. It was cool. Every time when we travel around to all these tracks, you had a local 3 or 4 guys that were their local heroes, and us out-of-town guys would come in there, and it made it something special that the local fans could go see their heroes race against the out-of-town guys. And it was had some really good ties to those communities, and it's all gone now,
Garrett,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Uncle Rick.
I agree. Like I remember when I had my super late at the end of the season, we would go, hit Vegas and Cajon and Orange Show and T. Carson or Craig Road. And, you're right. There was always their home track guys and then some on the road guys. And it was a good community of racers and some really big shows. And I agree also that, and I've raced at Irwindale, I've raced at KCRP, that there's no substitute for, I would say 3/8 at the biggest, fans up close, race in your face. You're right. You get 12 cars on a half mile. It's a terrible show. It's a shame that those days are gone, but thank goodness we still have guys like you that are, helping us remember it and still out there crisscrossing and hitting those short tracks.
I appreciate that. I wish the sport hadn't gone in the direction it has now, but there's still good racing. There's all these young kids, even though they look super young, they're really talented. They've been racing quarter midgets and go-karts, and they got a lot of racing under their belt, even though they're only 10, 11, 12 years old,
The Spears SRL has done a good job with super late model racing down here, and I think now they're running the Snowball Derby and some races back in that area. But I think they've done a good job with the series that they have going on.
They're doing something right, because they've been kind of chosen to come in and put on these races. They just had a race at Berlin that they put on here earlier in the week, I think it was, or maybe it was last week.
Are you going to jump into any of those? They have a pro late model and a super late model.
We would like to. At this time, I'm concentrating more on what's going on at work with our car business, with our car line. It's got tougher with gas prices and COVID and everything that's going on right now. It's so expensive to go. Like for us to go run one of those bigger races and travel, you're looking anywhere from $25,000 to $35,000 a race. And expenses, and just adds up to a lot of money.
Wow. Well, Garrett, I always like to finish up with just a couple questions. This has been fantastic. Thank you again for taking the time. A couple of the questions I have that I always try to ask everybody is, we'll start with the first one. What do you think makes a good racer?
I think you got to have a lot of desire. You got to have a lot of heart. You got to be able to get knocked down and want to get back up. Because that happens a lot. You're not going to win all the races, and you got to realize that it's just not about you. It's about your crew. It's about everybody. It's family members. Everybody has to sacrifice in order to do this. It's a journey. It's something you should cherish.
Do you? And then question number two: Do you think that racing desire, that racing instinct, do you think people can acquire that over time, or do you think that's something that people are just naturally born with?
I think it's a little bit of both. I still think it comes from whoever wants to put in the hard work will be more successful. There's a lot of people out there with a lot of talent, but you see them come and go. You look at the stories of the guys that are really good football players, and they got that deal on the NFL, the kind of story about these different guys, and it shows all the hard work they put in and sacrifice. There's a lot about that. Ron Hornaday was, in my opinion, probably one of the last of the real racers that made it all the way, and he helped everybody. He just was a really hard worker. He paid his dues. He learned how to work on a race car. He could do everything. They ain't too many guys like that, but there's a few of them. But if there was ever a mold on how it should be done, he'd be one of the guys you would mold off of.
That's awesome. And the last question I'll ask here is, if you had to do it all over again, would you change anything?
Well, I had some opportunities with the West Cars and the tour when it first started, but there's always like a sweet spot. I had a couple of them. When we were running those Winston West races that were televised, and they were 500 lappers. I had come out of the open comp races where you had like 150 cars, and raced with Dan Press and Roman Kalzinski and Jim Thurkettle. All the guys I considered to be my heroes were on Hornaday. And it was really hard, good racing. And when I started doing the Winston West Series, which was an opportunity to maybe move up the ladder, they only had like 12 cars or so that were following. They used to come up with quite a few fill-in cars just to make the field and make it look good for TV and all that at the time. And we had to wear sweaters and slacks to the drivers' meeting. It was more of a showmanship deal, and I maybe said the wrong things when I got interviewed a couple times about it. I kind of like the good old days of the open comp cars better than what was going on with that deal. I kind of stepped on my foot a little bit, stepped on my, and then there was a time when I had an opportunity, but my brother got sick with leukemia, and I took off racing for 2 or 3 years, and was his bone marrow transplant, and did blood transfusions and all that stuff, and
wow,
and that kind of, I decided at that point not to pursue going back east. There was some opportunity at that time. We were kind of moving up the ladder really fast, especially after Dick Trickle helped me out a little bit. But I don't have no regrets. Feel real lucky that at my age, started when I'm 21 and I'm 66 now, and still doing it, and have a lot of good people I've met over the years. and I wouldn't trade him for anything.
Awesome. Love it.
Wow. So some great stories, some great knowledge. And, I think that I heard you say something once about seeing a guy walk on water. And I think that you're that next guy in that lineage, Garrett, the Dick Trickle, Offerman, Hornaday, you're the last man standing, right? You're the last guy at OK Corral that's still, running around and keeping short track racing alive, not just from a track ownership standpoint, but from a racing standpoint. And we sure appreciate you taking the time, and we might have to circle back and get you on another show.
Well, I'd love to, and I really appreciate talking to you guys, and especially knowing that you were from Sauga Speedway. That was one of my crown jewels, I would say.
Awesome.
Appreciate that.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Garrett. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
Garrett. Take care.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.